Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Jason stood frozen at the edge of the Five Poppies Resort, his gaze locked on Britt. His mind raced, unable to process the sight before him. The woman he had mourned for, the woman he had thought lost forever, was standing there, alive, breathing, her eyes wide with shock at the encounter. The initial rush of disbelief left him numb, his breath caught in his chest. Everything he had believed about her death, about the events that had led to her disappearance, was being unraveled in front of him. Britt, once an enigma, a tragic figure in his life, now returned to him as something far more complicated. The confusion in her eyes mirrored his own. It was clear that her reappearance wasn't meant to be seen by him, or anyone. The questions that flooded his mind were too many to count, but one stood out more than the rest. Why had she chosen to disappear? Why had she not reached out to him or anyone who cared for her? He tried to take a step toward her, but the weight of the moment anchored him in place. He had been prepared for an ordinary mission, to find answers to the lingering mysteries of the underworld, to track down those who posed threats to his family and loved ones. But nothing could have prepared him for this moment, this impossible moment when Britt stepped back into his world as though nothing had happened. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her again, it was the overwhelming flood of emotions that he had buried deep within himself for years. Jason had struggled with loss, with the feeling of emptiness that had followed her absence. It was a void that he had never fully healed, even as he moved on, fighting battles and facing threats in every corner of his life. But now, seeing Britt alive, that hole seemed even more pronounced, a reminder that the past was never as far behind as he had hoped. She wasn't just a woman from his past. She was someone who had been buried in his soul, someone who had left a mark on him he could never erase. But the silence that followed between them was deafening. Britt's expression wavered between recognition and fear, her lips parted as though she had been caught in the act of some unspeakable crime. Her voice was choked when she finally spoke, as if she were unsure whether she was speaking to Jason or herself. The question hung in the air like a weight neither of them could lift. Why didn't you reach out? Before Jason could form any kind of response, the situation grew even more complicated. Jocelyn appeared at his side, stepping into the scene with an air of urgency that was uncharacteristic of her usual demeanor. But there was something different about her now. Gone was the bright-eyed, trusting girl he had once known. Standing before him now was a young woman hardened by experiences Jason couldn't begin to fathom. Her face was drawn, the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts evident in her tense posture. And then there was Vaughn, the man at her side, looking equally on edge, his body betraying him with tremors that Jason could spot even from a distance. Vaughn's neck bore the unmistakable signs of a violent altercation, a bruising chokehold that suggested he had barely escaped with his life. It was impossible to ignore the feeling of dread that washed over him. Nothing about this was a coincidence. The tension that permeated the air wasn't just from the sight of Jocelyn and Vaughn, it was something darker, something far more dangerous. As he took in the scene, the puzzle pieces began to shift in his mind, each one falling into place with horrifying clarity. There was a plan unfolding here, one far bigger than any of them had realized, and at the center of it all stood Brennan. Jason's sharp instincts kicked in immediately. He could see through the false assurances, the veiled attempts at concealing the truth. Vaughn's mumbled words, meant to explain away the tension, fell on deaf ears. Jason knew better. He knew the signs of someone trying to cover their tracks, trying to hide the truth. It was all there, the subtle clues in the way they moved, the way they avoided eye contact, the way Jocelyn's voice quivered under his scrutiny. It was as if the ground beneath them had shifted, and they were now standing on a precipice they didn't even know existed. Jocelyn, her face pale, finally spoke. She tried to deny it, to play it off as nothing more than a simple misunderstanding, but Jason wasn't fooled. He saw the cracks in her facade. He saw the way her eyes shifted, the way her hands fidgeted, betraying her inner turmoil. And then, in a moment of quiet surrender, Jocelyn's truth spilled out. She had joined the WSB. The words hit Jason like a physical blow. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Jocelyn, the girl he had watched grow up, had become a part of the very world Jason had spent his life fighting against. He had never imagined she would choose this path, and yet, here she was, caught in a web of danger and deceit. She didn't join for the glory or the thrill of the game. No, Jocelyn had stepped into this dark world out of necessity, believing that it was the only way she could protect those she loved. The WSB, a world of espionage, covert missions, and unspeakable secrets, had become her refuge. But now, with the weight of her decision crashing down on her, Jocelyn realized how far she had fallen. The idealism of youth had led her here, but the harsh reality of her choices had crushed that innocence. And now, trapped in a situation far beyond her control, she understood the true cost of her decision. Jason's heart ached for her, but there was no time for pity. Jocelyn had chosen her path, and now it was up to him to protect her from the fallout. The danger was closer than ever, and Jason knew that Brennan was at the heart of it all. The man who had orchestrated Britt's disappearance, who had dragged Jocelyn into this treacherous world, was still out there, and he wasn't done. Jason felt the weight of the situation settle over him like a suffocating blanket. There was no turning back now. Jocelyn was no longer just a victim, she was a player in this deadly game. And Jason, despite the anger and betrayal surging through him, knew that he had to protect her, to help her navigate the labyrinth she had walked herself into. But more than that, he had to confront Brennan. The man who had been the puppet master in all of this was out there, waiting, and Jason would stop at nothing to bring him down. The weight of the responsibility settled heavily on Jason's shoulders, but there was no fear. No hesitation. His love for his family, for Jocelyn, for Britt, was greater than any fear. And with that resolve, he prepared himself for the battle ahead, against Brennan, against the darkness that had swallowed the lives of those he loved. It was time to fight back. The war had just begun. Britt, Jocelyn, and Vaughn, 3 lives that had once been separate, now entwined in a deadly web of conspiracy. Each one of them, in their own way, was caught in the machinations of one man, a shadowy figure whose name loomed over them like a specter, Brennan. He wasn't just a villain hiding in the shadows, he was the embodiment of darkness itself, a master manipulator who thrived on betrayal and fear. His hands were everywhere, pulling the strings of their destinies, twisting their lives into something unrecognizable, all for his own twisted agenda. Brennan's influence was like a shadow that spread through every corner of their lives, infecting everything it touched. It was impossible to escape his reach. The name itself sent chills down their spines, for it was synonymous with power, control, and danger. Where there was chaos, Brennan's fingerprints could always be found. He wasn't merely a threat lurking in the background, he was a puppet master, orchestrating every move in this sickening game of life and death. Britt, Jocelyn, and Vaughn were mere pieces on his chessboard, their every move calculated and dictated by his unseen hand. Jason had always trusted his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him that the truth was far darker than he had imagined. The shock of seeing Britt alive was still fresh, but as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, he realized something far more sinister. Britt's survival wasn't due to some twist of fate. No, her life had been spared because she had been forced into servitude by Brennan, manipulated into playing a role she had never wanted to play. For years, Jason had believed her death to be a tragic and senseless loss, but now he understood that it had been part of a far larger, more twisted plan. Britt had been coerced into becoming a pawn in Brennan's game, her every action monitored, her every decision influenced by the silent threat that hovered over her. Vaughn's situation was just as dire, if not more so. The signs of a violent struggle were clear on his neck, the marks of a near-fatal chokehold that had almost claimed his life. Jason could see the fear in his eyes, but there was something else too, something darker. Vaughn wasn't just a victim of random violence, this was a warning. A sign that Brennan would not tolerate any form of disobedience. It was a brutal reminder that those who strayed from the path laid out for them by Brennan would be eliminated without hesitation. Vaughn's near-death experience was a message to anyone who dared challenge Brennan's authority, fall in line, or face the consequences. But the most shocking revelation came with Jocelyn. The young woman who had once been innocent, who had grown up with so much promise, had been pulled into Brennan's web. Jason had never imagined that Jocelyn, his own flesh and blood, would find herself in such a dangerous and complicated situation. But now, it was all too clear. Brennan had seen in her the perfect pawn, someone young, impressionable, and idealistic, someone who believed in the right cause and was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. But Brennan was not interested in ideals. He cared only for control. And Jocelyn, with her naivety and trust in the world, was the perfect tool for him to exploit. Jason's heart broke as he watched her, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. Jocelyn, the girl he had protected, the girl he had watched grow up, was now trapped in a world she didn't fully understand. Brennan had seen her as the perfect target, someone who could be molded, someone who could be shaped into a weapon without even knowing it. She was an unwitting soldier in Brennan's war, a puppet who thought she was fighting for the right reasons but was instead being used for his own gain. The more Jason thought about it, the clearer it became. Brennan's plans were not just about power or control. They were about domination, about turning everyone into a tool to further his own agenda. He had no regard for human life, no concern for the people he trampled on to get what he wanted. Britt, Vaughn, and Jocelyn were all victims of his manipulation, and Jason realized with a sickening certainty that they were not the only ones. The ripple effect of Brennan's actions spread further than anyone could imagine, and the consequences of crossing him were far more deadly than anyone had thought. Jason knew that the time had come to confront Brennan, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. The man was a master at hiding in plain sight, a shadow who could slip through the cracks and disappear just when you thought you had him cornered. But Jason had a resolve that was stronger than any fear Brennan could instill. He would fight back, not just for Britt and Jocelyn, but for everyone who had been caught in Brennan's snare. The battle ahead would be brutal, but Jason was ready. For the first time in a long while, he felt a surge of clarity, a sense of purpose. Brennan had taken so much from him and the people he loved, but now it was time to take it back. The path would be treacherous, filled with deception and danger at every turn. But Jason was no stranger to darkness. He had lived in it for so long that it no longer frightened him. And as he stared at the faces of Britt, Jocelyn, and Vaughn, he knew that this was the fight of his life. A fight to save them, to protect the ones he loved, and to finally put an end to Brennan's reign of terror. This war wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption. And Jason would stop at nothing to win it. In the depths of her desperation, Jocelyn's voice quivered with fear as she whispered her plea to Jason. Her words, fragile and filled with raw emotion, broke through the heavy silence that hung between them. She begged him, her eyes wide with terror, to keep her secret. "If this gets back to the higher-ups," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "they'll punish me, they'll erase me, Jason. You have to promise me you won't tell anyone. If they find out, I'm dead." Jason's heart ached at the sight of Jocelyn, the girl he had watched grow up, now a shadow of the innocent child she once was. Her hands shook as she reached out for his support, the weight of her choices bearing down on her in a way that no one, least of all her, could have anticipated. Her confession hit him like a sledgehammer, tearing through the calm exterior he had so carefully constructed over the years. But as much as it hurt, Jason knew there was no turning back. She was family, his blood, and he wouldn't, turn his back on her in her most vulnerable moment. With a pained sigh, Jason gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His acceptance of her request didn't come easily, every part of him screamed to expose the truth, to let someone else take the burden of this secret. But he understood what it meant. He knew what it would cost Jocelyn if anyone found out, what it would cost him as well. His decision to keep her secret wasn't out of blind loyalty, but out of love. He couldn't condemn her to the cruel fate she feared. But even as he made this vow to her, he felt the weight of another dangerous truth settle heavily in his chest. He wasn't just fighting the visible enemies in front of him. The true battle was with the shadows, those dark forces pulling at the people he loved from the inside. And those shadows, much like Brennan, were far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Five Poppies had once appeared to be a place of luxury, a sprawling resort that promised relaxation and peace. But to Jason, its polished exterior had now become something far more sinister. The once welcoming walls now felt like the cold, unyielding stone of a prison. Every corner seemed to conceal another secret, every quiet murmur of the staff felt like a veiled threat. He knew now that each smile, every seemingly innocent glance exchanged between the workers, hid a much darker truth. This place wasn't a resort, it was a stage for Brennan's puppet show, a carefully crafted facade under which he pulled all the strings. Jason's mind raced as he processed the implications. Brennan had set up camp in Five Poppies, using it as his command center. It wasn't just a place to hide, it was a place to control, to manipulate, and to make everyone dance to his whims. Every step Jason took, every corner he turned, felt as if he were being watched, like a piece on a massive chessboard, where Brennan was the grandmaster and he was just another pawn. The entire resort had become a massive game of survival, and Brennan was winning. Jason had fought countless battles in his life, had been to hell and back, but nothing prepared him for this. This was a war on a different front, a war where strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and above all, strategic. To defeat Brennan, Jason knew he had to be sharper than ever. He had to be 2 steps ahead at all times, anticipating Brennan's moves before they even happened. But it wasn't just about taking down Brennan. It was about protecting Britt, uncovering the secrets that Brennan had forced her to hide, and, most importantly, safeguarding Jocelyn. His heart clenched again at the thought of her, caught in this web, manipulated by a force she couldn't even begin to understand. Jason wasn't just her protector, he was the one who had to find a way to keep her safe from a system far beyond her control. And then there was Brennan. The man who had set everything in motion. Jason knew that if Brennan's plan succeeded, it wouldn't just be Jocelyn and Britt who paid the price. It would be everyone in Port Charles. Brennan wasn't just looking to destroy individuals, he wanted to tear apart the entire city, rip apart the fabric of what made it home for so many people. He would stop at nothing to prove his dominance, and Jason could feel the storm coming. Jason's resolve hardened like steel. He had faced betrayal, loss, and unimaginable pain, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for those he loved, a fight to ensure that Brennan's reign of terror ended before it could take everything from him. Jason knew what he had to do. He had to confront Brennan head-on, expose the lies, the manipulation, and the deadly game Brennan had orchestrated. But to do that, he needed more than just information. He needed to outsmart a man who had spent his life in the shadows, building his empire on fear and deception. Jason's mind raced with plans, counter-strategies, and contingencies. He would need to gather the truth about Britt, find the key to breaking Brennan's hold over her. But time was running out. Each day spent in Five Poppies felt like another step closer to the point of no return. Jason couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not with so much at stake. As the sun set over the resort, casting long shadows over the grounds, Jason stood firm in his decision. He wasn't leaving Five Poppies until Brennan was brought to justice. The battle ahead would be unlike any other he had faced, but he was ready. There was no going back now. For Jocelyn. For Britt. For all of Port Charles. Jason would face the darkness that Brennan had created and destroy it, piece by piece, no matter the cost. The night at Five Poppies seemed to stretch beyond time, each moment dragging with the weight of unspoken fears and desperate decisions. Jason walked through the dimly lit hallways, his footsteps echoing on the cold marble floors, as the sound of his own heartbeat thudded in his ears. The resort, once a place of luxury and tranquility, now felt like a claustrophobic cage, its walls closing in on him with every step he took. It was a place of masks, a place where the bright smiles of the staff hid shadows of deception, and the opulent surroundings masked the sinister reality beneath. Jason's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He couldn't shake the images of Britt, Jocelyn, and Vaughn from his mind. They were all caught in a web of lies, each one bound by the invisible threads that Brennan had spun around them. Brennan, the puppet master, the shadow pulling the strings, had ensnared them all, and Jason was left in the middle of it, fighting to save them, fighting to free them from his grasp. The thought of it made his stomach churn. How had it come to this? How had his family, his loved ones, ended up as pawns in this ruthless game? The darkness of the night seemed to mirror the darkness that had taken hold of their lives. It was more than just the absence of light, it was the absence of hope, the feeling that everything was slipping through his fingers. The walls of 5 Poppies felt like they were closing in on him, but Jason knew that he couldn't stop. He had no choice but to move forward, to keep fighting, even as the odds stacked against him grew higher. Every corner he turned, every room he entered, felt like a trap waiting to spring, each moment a reminder of the stakes he was up against.